Welcome back to Beginning Writing for Publication. We're going to talk now about the review of the literature. This is kind of, as I said, the order that we've done this course in is a little bit strange, but I wanted you to have a feel for your question and the methodology when we go into this, because it will help you understand about what you need to put in your review of the literature. When you start writing your paper, the first thing you do is the introduction. Follow the models in the journal to which you are going to submit this paper. How long do they want the introduction? What style do they want it in? Now, most introductions need to include a statement of the problem, why this problem is significant to your field, how it applies to the larger field of research, and if you're doing an experimental design paper, your hypothesis, or if you're doing a treatment or a qualitative study, you may want to instead put the goals or the objectives of the study. And you're going to quickly summarize the methods used, both your methods for collecting data and your methods for analyzing data. Now, this is just a summary. You're not going to explain your methods here. You are simply going to introduce them. Whether the introduction includes the review of the literature or not really depends on the journal. In some journals, the introduction flows directly into the review of the literature. In other words, you have set the problem up, the context, and you immediately go into what is known. In others, it is separated and put under a different heading. To decide which to do, look at the models in the journal. What is a literature review? This is a quote I found that I thought was helpful. A literature review is a summary of previous research on a topic. Literature reviews can either be a part of a larger report of a research project, a thesis, or a bibliographic essay that is published separately in a scholarly journal. In other words, sometimes the review of the literature is so extensive and so important that it is published separately and not as part of another study. For example, if there's a lot of work that's been done on a particular topic, but the exactly what all of this amounts to is not clear, it's very helpful to bring all those studies together and analyze how they go together and present that as a separate publication without additional research being done. That's a literature review that's published separately. This this video, and the next one are going to focus more on a literature review that is part of your own study. But a lot of the principles that we're talking about can go either way, could be used in both modes of literature reviews. Okay, I have about 3 slides here that talk about what a literature review does. They're a little bit repetitive, but I think it will help you to hear these multiple times. First of all, a literature review must be organized and directly related to the thesis or research questions you are developing. In other words, resist the temptation to put in everything that is known about this topic. You are going to read much more than is included in your literature review, because the reading, the searching of all these articles prepares you. It gives you the background you need to be an authority on this subject, and it also helps you identify those studies that are most important to support your particular study at this time. That's what you're looking for. Those studies that are most important to inform and support this particular study. It's synthesized results into a summary of what is and is not known. Do not put a list of references. You summarize those references in a meaningful narrative. The references are supporting the points you are making, not the other way around. If there are areas of controversy in the literature, be sure and note them. Don't just go with the major perspective. And you may want to mention questions that need further research. You want to show the gaps in the literature, especially if the study you are doing addresses some of those gaps. Why do a literature review? It identifies what is known about a topic. It presents different perspectives or theories related to the topic. It identifies the strengths and weaknesses in the current research base, and you cannot do that unless you've read fairly extensively in that particular area. It clarifies the significance of the current work. Where does it fit in that literature base, in the literature body of knowledge that scholars in your field go to? It informs the reader and sets the context. I like to say that a literature review should do three things. First, it proves to your reader that you're an expert in this topic. You give enough background to show that you know what research has been done, what needs to be done, why it's important. Your reader needs to have confidence in the rest of the paper. And so the literature review sets up that confidence. It sets you up as knowing the field. The second thing it does is it helps your reader know enough about the field that they can follow your research. Excuse me. It gives the reader enough background that the rest of your paper makes sense. And third, it sets the context. It helps your reader know what is unique about your study, what is significant about your study. This is kind of a review to see what has and has not been investigated, develop general explanations for observed variations, identify potential relationships between the concepts that are out there and your hypotheses. This is important to learn how others have defined and measured key concepts. When you're going through the literature, pay attention to the methods that other researchers have used. Sometimes they can improve. They have ideas that improve your own methods, the methods you're thinking about doing, and maybe the way they analyze the data, the way they gather the data, can contribute to the quality of how you write your own methodology section, gather your data, and analyze your data. So this is very important. And to discover how a research project is related to the work of others. So, overall, to inform the writer, that's you, sets you up as an expert. To inform the reader, helps them know, give them enough background to know what's going on, sets the context, says what's unique about your study, presents opposing views if there's controversy, provides the rationale for your study. Why are you spending the time? And demonstrates the significance. Now, how to do one. These are the things it's supposed to accomplish. First of all, you need to clearly identify the topics that should be in your literature review. I suggest that you look at that question that we talked about, farming, that may have turned into the title of your paper, but it's that central question, that central thing that your research is all about. And look for key words in that question. 3 to 5 key areas that are important to understand if you're going to understand your research. Now, put those into an electronic database, and I gave you an example here in the PowerPoint, and this will also be on your resources so that you can go and try this yourself. Put in the keyword and see how many studies it brings up. For example, say I was looking at procrastination among freshman students in science. I put in procrastination and pull up 20,000 articles. Whoa, that's not going to help me very much. So maybe I put in academic procrastination. It doesn't pull up anything. So I put in procrastination in education, and it pulls up 200 articles. But I can quickly look through 200 articles. And so playing with those terms until you find the terms in that sentence that are meaningful in the research, but not so broad as that they to be useless to you. And then you're going to be able to use those to do your lit review. You're going to organize your lit review around those terms. Now, I'm going to strongly suggest that if you're using an electronic database, and most of you will be, that you use the database thesaurus. Now, almost all the electronic databases have a thesaurus. Look around on the buttons, find where it says thesaurus, and go to it. The reason is that there are a lot of terms that really mean the same thing, and in academic research, terms become popular, go out of date. For example, the word voice. Voice meant nothing 20 years ago, and then suddenly about that time, finding one's voice, having voice, was a matter of empowerment, and it became very important. And so the terms change. When I did my own dissertation, it was with the American Indians in the U.S., the Indian tribes in the U.S., and a popular term at that time was to refer to them as Native Americans. I put in Native Americans, and I could find very little meaningful research. So I went to the thesaurus and found that the academic search term for this population was American Indian, not Native American. And suddenly I had access to the research that was out there. So use the thesaurus, find the terms that match your terms that are the ones that are going to call up the literature. So first ask, what is my study really about? What topics do I need to understand to set the context for my study? Do the preliminary broad search, identify key studies, and review the key studies in detail. For example, I pull this up, Effectiveness of Motivational Strategies for Arabic Level 1 Students of English as a Foreign Language. Where do I start for the literature review? Maybe I want to look at motivation and student achievement, because that's going to tell me if motivation is linked to achievement. Maybe I want to look at motivational strategies, because strategies are what I'm focusing on in this research. Maybe I want to look specifically at studies related to Arabic learners of English to see what problems other researchers have identified for Arabic learners of English. Now, what the reader wants to see when they go to your literature review is they want to see a set of research that supports the statement that you have made that is your study. In other words, this right here, this title here, which is the topic of research, they want to see that you can support doing this research. So you're going to pull out 3 to 5 key topics within that to include in your literature review. This is another, in your resources I gave you a link to some model literature reviews, and this was one of them, and this was the title, The Determinants of Provincial Minimum Wages in Canada. Think for a minute, what does your reader expect to see in the literature review to set this up? Well, what was prepared was, first of all, the history of minimum wage policies. Just overall, where did minimum wage come from? When did people start looking at it and studying it and putting it into practice? And it turns out that most of the history had to do with the U.S. So then this researcher went to the political factors that determined minimum wages in this historical time in the U.S. In other words, if they're going to look at determinants of minimum wages, then they're going to look at what were the determinants in the past. Then they look at the history of minimum wage in Canada today, and maybe they find out that very little study has been done about minimum wages in Canada. That's a plus, because you can say, at that time, here's the history of the studies of minimum wage in Canada, and you can see that this research is badly needed because there has not been much research done to date. And that is establishing the evidence, the need to understand the topic. So you can kind of in your mind see how that reads. It goes from the beginning of minimum wages, what the policies were in the past, brings it down to the local context, and shows that this research is needed. So it follows a logical flow. Now, when you're doing your literature review, when you're looking at, not when you're writing it, when you're doing it, keep a log. The source information, now you can do this electronically. There's like EndNote, there's various other programs out there that can help you do this. Or you can just do it on a piece of paper in a notebook. But however you do it, keep up with the articles you read. Put in the author, the year, the page numbers, etc., so that you can, the full citation. Put in all the information you need for the citation. Put in the main ideas of the work. And a note is why you think it might be significant. Maybe you'll use it, maybe you won't, and maybe you'll forget it. So jot down why you thought it might be significant. You're going to read lots of them that you say, nope, not going to be significant. You don't even have to log them. But others that you think you might want to come back to, put them in your log. You may want to note any questions that you have while reading. It may make you want to read something else on that topic that this article introduces to you. And look at the keywords and note the keywords, because these may be keywords that you want to use in your search or even in your study. Okay, now we get down to what resources should I use? Only use validated sources. The temptation these days is to use a bunch of websites. Avoid that. First of all, if you can't find an author, avoid using that. Now, if it's done by a research body or an academic body, I'm in education. A lot of time I cite something from the Department of Education in the U.S. That's validated, even though it may not have an author. But avoid just where someone's written on a blog, where someone has put up a paper in open source, but it's not, you can't tell if it's been peer reviewed. So look at the quality of the paper, because the editors and the readers are going to go down to your reference list. And if you've used Wikipedia, they're going to question your scholarship. Not that Wikipedia isn't a wonderful resource. It's just that it is not really validated for academic use. So you're going to maybe you can find that same information somewhere else in a peer-reviewed, published, respected journal. And try your very best to use only validated sources. Use the most current research sources. Anything over 10 years is frowned out in academia. Now, maybe there's some landmark study. I'm in science. Maybe I have to reference Darwin's Origin of the Species, because it's just so powerful. If it's got to be referenced and it's old, that's fine. But look through your paper. If more than about 10% of your references are more than 10 years old, it's not going to get published. So work on that. Find the same information in more current, more validated sources. Find the most influential, the most frequently cited. If you see this person's name come up in, just about every paper you read, obviously they're a leader in your field. You need to consider their work and see whether or not it needs to be included in your reference. It doesn't always have to be, but when you use the major ones whenever possible. Select the ones most clearly related to your study, and the original sources as much as possible. We're going to, in the next video, I'm going to talk about how to reference and cite things. But if you're reading an article and they say how important so-and-so's ideas are, go back to the original paper that they're referencing, if at all possible, and read it yourself. they might have misquoted them. They might have miscited them. They might have misunderstood their ideas. So as much as possible, go back to that original source. And that last one's kind of a sneaky one. If you can find the information in your, for example, if you're submitting to a particular journal, and you can find where there are scholars that have published on your topic in their journal, they like that. They like to see their journals on the reference list. So that's just a little hint to remember. If you have a choice between 2 or 3 studies to put to support a point, use the one out of the journal to which you are submitting. Okay, where do I find references? The library, the electronic catalog, interlibrary loans, and electronic databases are where most of us these days find our articles. Don't be afraid to if you have to pay to get an article. Remember, somebody owns that information, and if you're not subscribing to that journal, then it is only right and fair that you might have to pay to get access to that journal, because other readers paid to have a subscription to that journal to read that same article. Using electronic databases, use keywords from other studies. For example, if you see a study that really has to do with your work, and look at what the keywords were, because using those keywords can pull up similar studies. Use synonyms and different combinations of terms. We talked about that, by using American Indians instead of Native Americans, this sort of thing. Use the online thesaurus. Look in the reference lists of articles that are helpful to you to find other good articles, and then search them up. Then what? Scan the titles, scan the abstracts. In other words, you pull up the electronic databases and you've got 250 articles. Pull them up and look at the titles. Does it sound like you? Does it sound like this article is helpful to you? The ones that do sound like that, hit on them. The ones that don't, skip them. Scan the abstracts. You can tell an awful lot from the abstracts. If the abstract seems like it addresses your problem, then access the entire article to find the information and to evaluate the study. Now, a lot of people just pull their information off the abstracts. What that can do is when you read the entire study, you find out that it was a poorly designed study. Maybe the methodology was not really, their sample size was not right, their methods were not well done, their statistics were not rigorous. You may find flaws in their methods or in the findings. Maybe the findings did not really emerge from the data. And so you're going to want to read the entire article. A true scholar goes back and reads the entire article and doesn't just take the word of the abstract. The abstract tells you how important that article is and how well it fits your study. But it's the article that can tell you how good a study it is. Take notes, outline your proposed lit review, and then write. And in the next video, we're going to talk about writing that lit review. Thank you.